Tobias is a PhD student from the Vishub lab. You probably have heard this Vishub lab previously because Benjamin Bach is heading this lab in Edinburgh. And this is one of the places where we like to go virtually quite often because there is always something nice happening there. And he's also a member of the Urban Complexity Lab in Potsdam, where I think you are right now, right, Tobias?
Almost. I'm in Berlin right now.
Okay, you're in Germany. But... So thank you for being with us. Tobias, you're working on, and your work focuses on user experience and data literacy. That are two themes that are really, really keen to our heart here in Toulouse, and I think for the audience as well. And on visualization engagement, and that's also something that is quite new for many of us and very interesting. Very recently, also, you have worked on COVID and understanding people feelings, but I don't know if you would talk a little bit about that, but I know that there is a website about that, and it's very interesting as well. And the type of description you have been collecting and visualizing during COVID-19 right now. So I will not follow this presentation because I'm pretty sure you will do that better than I do. So without further ado, and after I said that you all can ask questions in the chat, and you are really welcome to ask questions during the talk, even though I will take them in the end and translate that. If you write them in French, I will translate that into English. So now that is said, without further ado, Tobias, the floor is yours. I will stop sharing my screen right now, and the floor is yours.
In today's talk, I titled it "Talking Back to Data" because it's such a nice expression in English when, talking back to somebody means that you respond, because or respond and sometimes criticize, because what I'm interested in is that data visualization to me is not only a tool to communicate something to the audience, but also to basically listen to the audience's reactions. I think I was introduced pretty well, but I will again show a slide of me introducing myself. Hi, this is me, Tobias Kaye. As it was said, I'm a database designer and researcher in Edinburgh and in Potsdam. And I really like the design part of visualization, taking a data set and bringing it to life, so to say, making it experienceable for people. But my research, I would say, starts where the design process usually ends, because I'm interested in how people, once the visualization is designed and is there and is coded, how they see it, how they react to it. And this also means that I'm always torn between design and research, and the theory of things and the fun of coding them. So I will basically project my being torn about this onto today's talk and switch back and forth between research and design. But maybe it will be less flashy than other presentations. I can only imagine that Benjamin Bach, when he was here, showed a lot of examples, and I will a bit more on the research, and in the end come to the design and how this research is basically found or informs the design that we do. I will motivate today's talk based on 3 questions. Question 1 is, does data speak for itself? And here I will give a brief introduction and a critical perspective on my perspective on data and visualization. The second one is, why is it so loud in here? And I really tell you that it will make sense once we get there, even if it does not now. And I will speak about the role of the audience in visualization. And then I ask, where is the story, which basically introduces a practical example that also was just mentioned about embedding personal stories in visualization. So does data speak for itself? Frequent meetup goers may have heard this question before, and a lot of people have answered it. And I also want to give an answer. And the short one is no, data doesn't speak for itself. And I want to highlight two categories of answers, two perspectives why I think no is the answer. Because on the one hand, data presentation can be misleading, and it also may lack context. So what do I mean with that? This, I think, is an example some of you may have seen already. It is the maybe infamous tweet of Donald Trump at the end of his presidency, showing a choropleth map of the United States with all the counties in red that in the end voted for him. And the caption is, "Try to impeach this," implying that, you know, look at all the red on this map. The country is behind me. It's all Republican. You cannot impeach me. And thankfully, the visualization community was quick to respond, because what we see is that acres don't vote, people do. It's not the size of the county as in this choropleth map visualized. It's the amount of people who actually go and vote. And if we take the same data and plot it in a different way, the story that is told is a completely different one. So data doesn't speak for itself. It needs visualization as a vehicle, as a language, so to say. And this language can be biased or misleading. And I think this is what we have to keep in mind. Another, a bit more dry example, but I think it's equally powerful, is from research where Heidi Kong and colleagues did a study where they basically equipped similar data visualizations with different headlines and captions. And sometimes they just described the data, sometimes they gave away a message about the data, and sometimes the data and the message didn't really fit together. And to me, the really impressive quote from their study, when they asked participants what they take away from this visualization, is that the title influenced the perceived main message of a visualization, with viewers deriving opposing messages from the same visualization. When people look at visualization, they look for clues how to basically correctly understand it. And these clues are often texts, and they are more powerful than the data that we see. And I just find that completely amazing, because it really puts the power of visualization a bit into perspective. When I talk about this context of the surrounding of a visualization, context, I think, can also mean a lot of different things. And it's not just what is around a visualization, it's also how it came into being. I want to illustrate that with an example. What we see here is data, obviously. It's some numbers in some categories, but we cannot make sense of it. This data definitely does not speak for itself. What we think we should add is some labels and captions. So if we now look at the same data, it tells a much more elaborate story, because we now see that somebody counted cars during 3 times of the day, and they divided between cars and trucks. And we now have a lot more information, and we also have what most people would say context, would call context. But to me, this does not tell the story, the context of how the data came into being. Because on the one hand, that person who counted cars, what did they do when they encountered whatever this is? This weird mixture between a car and a truck. We don't know what were the rules for putting this into one category or the other, or what the decision in the end was. We are missing context, how this data came into being. And this is mostly done because then it better, if you don't have to just make the decisions, if you just make the decision and don't describe them, it's way easier to use the data. This was super well described by Dana Boyd and Kaye Crawford, who say that because data sets can be modeled, data is often reduced to what can fit into the mathematical model, what I just told. Yet taken out of context, data loses its meaning and value. It's just less valuable once you don't know how it came into being, because even if you cannot compute with all that context, it makes the data just so much more rich. Another problem that I have with this example that admittedly I made up myself, so it's easy to identify problems. People did not count the bicycles. Where, you know, this category is completely missing. It's not even, we do not even know, what made people decide whether it's a car, a truck, or a bicycle. It's completely missing from the data. And oops, yeah, there's the quote. Catherine Ignacio and Lauren Klein say, they basically have a whole chapter about the problem of this in their book, Data Feminism, where they say what gets counted counts, basically meaning, you know, what appears in the data, what becomes data is the only thing that people in the end will see. And obviously this is super influenced by who is the person who counts, what is their perspective on the world. Do they think bicycles matter or do they not? And for that reason, I would argue that data does not speak for itself. So the question is not, does it speak for itself? But if it does not speak for itself, why is it so loud in here? Because there is a lot of discourse around data going on. I would say, you know, maybe if the data doesn't speak and has a voice, a lot of people speak and a lot of people argue based on data. And we basically try to figure out what people are saying in a paper that we wrote last year. And it basically has three assumptions. The first assumption, or maybe the model at first, is that visualization is this vehicle that transports data through visualization to the audience. And the first assumption here is that the audience is not, you know, passively receiving information, but the audience is active and the audience has something to say about the data. And people connect their own experiences to data they see. For example, people who know that street people were counting cars on, they know how loud it is or how it smells, or, you know, what way you have to go in order to not go along this street. There is so much people connect about their everyday life to this data that, you know, we may never learn about. So to learn about, we have to have another assumption, that people are willing to express their thoughts. They basically can add back the responses to the data and with that make it more rich in context. And it's not just the context of the person, you know, who was on the street counting, it's responses and context of many, many people. And the third assumption is that responses change how a visualization is read. You know, once we not only have the data, but also the context, the audience will take different things away from the visualization, just like they did when they had different contexts in the title and in the caption of a visualization. So in the study that we ran, we asked ourselves, where do we find lots of people talking about visualization? And we found it on Reddit. So those of you who are not familiar with Reddit, it's this big social community. It's not a social network like Instagram, where you connect to your peers and follow people. It's more about sharing creations or things you found on the internet. And there is the really, really, really great community, Data is Beautiful, which is about, I think, 15 to 16 million members who subscribe to data visualization content. So one example is this map by Neil Kaye, which shows the area that was burned in the Australian bushfires in 2019. And the area of smoke that covers, and this was overlaid on a map of Europe to basically highlight and make it possible for others to relate to that data. And we basically just listened to what people were saying about what they were saying as a reaction in the comments of that visualization. And we did that for not only this visualizations, but many of them. And what we found is, oops, this was one slide too many. What we found is that when we ask how people respond to data visualizations, that on the one hand, they make sense of these visualizations by expressing their observations. Oh, look at this data point, or they ask for clarifications to the data owner. They make hypotheses why something is in the data, or they draw their conclusions and their interpretations. And we already kind of knew that people were doing that because we have social analysis tools where people do exactly that. They try to correctly interpret data to, for example, know where to plan the pipeline, or when to, in what quarter to invest in company X. You know, when they share a goal, it's easy for them to respond to the data. But, you know, in this public setting, what we found is that actually people had a much broader range of expressions, because beyond that sense-making bit, they also shared ways to improve the data. They expressed critique, they added additional information, they added background context, they made proposals how the visualization could be improved in order to be more impactful. But they also had personal relations. A lot of them were just opinions, because it's super, like there's a heavy discussion going on Reddit always. But there were also testimonies. And I want to describe two of these categories in a bit more detail. But before I do that, I want to talk about what made people, I will first introduce these two types of reactions, and then I will talk about what people motivated people to talk. Sorry, the presentation literally just finished 10 minutes ago, but I'm happy that you follow. On the one hand, people express critique, and with that, they publicly scrutinize the data, and they point out, for example, misleading representations. And I think this relates super well to the car counting example that I gave prior, because this is what's necessary. For example, to point out, hey, the bikes are missing. There, you know, the scrutiny that people have to when they read data visualizations, and from their own experience, they know, hey, there are bikes on the street. Where are they in the data? Is super important for others to read. And, you know, everybody sees the visualization, but not everybody knows the discussion around the data in the visualization. So here, critique is super helpful for everybody in the audience. And we had this other interesting type of reactions with testimonies. I hear some open mics. If it would be super great if people could close their mics, because, like I said, I'm literally on the edge with this presentation. I haven't practiced it so often. Testimonies are things that the audience offer, first-hand experiences from their everyday lives, where the presented information discloses biographical perspectives on the data. You know, this person I talked about, who knows the street, who maybe lives down a few houses from that street, walks past there every day, and has something to say about the data. I think now I will talk about motivations. Yes, we asked people why they engage with their comments, why express whatever they say. And on the one hand, what we found is that people have their personal perspectives and experiences. They, like I said, express opinions, they share emotions, they point out what's interesting to them in the data. They add anecdotal evidence, and they compare what they already know to what is in the visualization. And if there is a mismatch, they talk about it. And I think this is super helpful for visualization designers who want to know, oh, how does my audience read my visualizations? I think at this point, knowing that this is what happens in the background when people read your visualizations, to me is a lot of motivation to increase this kind of engagement. But obviously, people were not just reading and feeling this to themselves. They were very aware that with their comment, they are informing a public discourse. Like I said, 15 to 16 million people are in this community, and a lot of them do not write comments but read everything. So people know that their opinion is a part of how others make sense of the information, and they want to add their own story to stories that are there. They want to rectify publicly things that are wrong in the data. And I think in the end, all of this is done to spark discussion. One example that I can give about this visualization that we saw earlier is this one person giving a really detailed account of how it felt to be in the area that is affected not by the fire but by the smoke, saying that this is the worst air quality in the whole world, and this has been going on day after day after day, and I cannot see further than 25 meters. And where the data gives you this bird's eye perspective, which is kind of neutral and maybe even cold, this account gives the opposite perspective from the bottom up and fills it with life, fills it with, I think, a human perspective. So when we asked people, why do you write these accounts? Among the reasons I just mentioned, people say that they were looking to provide a human story behind the data. The data is, the visualization is powerful, but I think it's even more powerful when it's supplemented by real experiences. And this is basically to us when we had a participant say that this was gold, and we wrote it in the paper and we were super happy. But we were asking ourselves one question, because the problem on Reddit is that the visualization and the comments on the visualization are separate. There is, a separate comment section. People cannot embed their comments on the visualization where maybe it's meant to be, maybe it's what they refer to. And there is this great example or law from geography, Topler's law of geography, where he says that everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things, which I just find reads super well. And we were asking ourselves, if we could bring things more close, we could maybe improve this impact of the testimony it has, and we could make we could tell other stories with the data if it was not in a separated comment section. So I come to the third question: where is the story? There is this great example, Queering the Map, that really does a perfect job to put experiences where they happened. Queering the Map is basically a project where people can talk about their queer experiences. Here, I just today took a screenshot of the Toulouse map, which is not super crowded yet, but there are several hundred thousands of entries across the globe. And what I find so interesting about this is that the map may not per se be a visualization, but it's a reference frame. And you have also design decisions. Why do we take roads as the base layer for the map and not trees? There are design decisions, just like there are design decisions in how do I encode who are my voters for the Trump tweet, and on this on this reference map, you place these personal experiences that make more sense when they are closer together because they talk about space. And in a paper that people wrote about this project, Kirby and colleagues, they say that the map becomes a space of belonging. And this was super inspiring to us because this allowed us to basically ask, how would a graph of belonging look like? If we take this idea that people place their experiences on a map, but not let them place it on a map, but in a data visualization, would that, help people read the data visualization? Would it change how others read the data? What kind of reactions would we actually get? So we were looking for a good context for this visualization, and we are so lucky that we are in this global pandemic still after 2 years, and I think it's the first moment in time where actually a majority of people globally can relate to data that they see represented in a visualization, because the case numbers mean something to people, and they have a personal experiences how these numbers feel, and we basically wanted to tap into that. And we designed the platform Corona Moments. You can see the URL there, but I will also show it in the end. And here we ask what stuck with us throughout this pandemic. What the website shows is that we have a line chart of the COVID cases. You can filter by country to basically get the data that you can locally relate to. And alongside this chart are these little bubbles. And this is basically exactly what I was just talking about. It is placing people's experiences in the data and see what happens and what people express. Because each of these bubbles is a story that one person submitted. For example, here is an example from Germany. Due to hospital regulations, I couldn't be part of my child's birth and had to wait. And, this super personal accounts of how the pandemic affected them and at what point it affected them. We have people, like I said, when I gave this street example, people giving very detailed accounts how it feels to, every morning sit on the roof of the house in Athens during lockdown, and what it's like. And I find these accounts so rich in context. And we have people talking about how they feel strange. After 2 years, they still have not really gotten to know or network in the city that they moved to before the pandemic. And all of these are interesting on their own, but I find it also interesting because we see where they cluster. What are the points in time where people connect a lot of stories to? And I think this is it's still ongoing research. We haven't really gotten into the data, but basically, since it's more research than design, we also have some questions about how people use this kind of visualization. And before I get to that, I will show how you can add your own bubble to this, because it's an open participatory project. Everybody can add their data. Everybody can at a moment in whatever language they choose, just saying. So I'm very happy if you want to give it a try and add your own moment, whatever you want to say. So because now we get to this part, because we are interested in how people use it, we are interested in whether bringing the context closer to the charts makes a difference. Like I said before, we did this Reddit study where we have visualization and responses separated, and now we want to see what changes when we bring it closer together. So we basically added another view that is similar, I would argue, to Reddit, and you have the same content, but it's not in the visualization, but a bit further away from it. And what we learned is that people are way more likely to write a story when they see that it will be embedded in the visualization. It's like really 3 times as many people write in another view than this one. So I find that already super relevant for crowdsourcing with data visualizations, crowdsourcing qualitative data with this kind of participatory visualization may be more engaging if you place people's responses in the visualization they talk about. But we're also interested in what context provenance, we call it, is more engaging. On the one hand, we show these personal audience responses, and we basically want to see, okay, with what can we compare this in order to find out how people actually use it. So we also have another visualization that shows institutional responses. So for example, we have for all of the countries the government responses placed in the perfectly same view, and see how people use this compared to the personal responses. And then we learn that people are more likely to keep on reading new responses when they are personal and not when they are this government policy responses. So to come to an end and to sum up, I will basically go back to the questions that I introduced in the beginning. Does data speak for itself? We know the short answer is no, but I think I hope I could show you that representation is what makes it speak. The language that data needs to speak is visualization, and that language can be misleading. What actually makes the message heard is the context, and it can be even, the context can be even louder than the visualization. Therefore, it's super important to have this context. Why is it so loud in here? Because the audience has a broad range of context. Right? We saw all these different reactions that people expressed on Reddit, and telling the human story behind data makes visualization more powerful. It can make it more loud. And I think it's important to listen to the audience, because you could learn something. And where is the story? Everybody's story could be embedded in a visualization. Obviously, not every data is, requires people's responses to it. Sometimes it may be even problematic to add these responses to the data. But nevertheless, it's a great way to collect and represent context, which we know is super relevant to people when they read visualizations. So with that, I want to thank you. I'm happy to look at the questions in the chat. If you have a second, you can follow the Corona Moments Twitter account, which we basically made to promote the project, because we're still looking for participants and anybody can participate. So Corona_Moments is the Twitter account. There are also some information about me. I'm happy to answer your questions via mail or on Twitter or wherever. And if you have a second, visit the project on the displayed URL. And that concludes my talk. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tobias. It was really an inspiring presentation here and a lot of thoughts there. So it reminds me a lot of the usual question we had in visualization. But before asking myself some question, there is one by Florian. He asks you, how can you use the response from an audience to enhance visualization? Just showing comments is not always easy to show something, and that's right. The question is, I think it's how, but maybe Florian could comment on, but could you embed that? Are we moving from summary to really seeing the data points? How can we really embed not only in the visualization, but in a story? And I think it's a general question. Yeah.
You know how good questions are when you know that you can't answer them. Yeah, great question. I think for things like line charts, the language is relatively easy. I think these dots in this particular examples work. But what do you do when you have, I don't know, a dot plot, a steam graph, a whatever? The visual language for that is not developed. And I mean, when I started the PhD, I thought that this would be my goal. Spoiler, it's not. And I think we need to tackle this one example at a time. You know, for maps, these markers work. For line charts, these bubbles work. How we can use this in any other kind of chart, and whether it's helpful in any other kind of chart is another question. Another question that I try to take in advance, because I know it might be critical, a critical question that is related to that. I think another part of that visual language that needs to be developed is what is it really that people relate to? Is it a data point? Is it an area? Is it just the time? Because what we see in these Corona Moments project, people less often talk about the data, but they talk about the time. So what do they refer to? And would we, with another example, have responses that require a more, you know, particular language where people can point to specific data points? But yeah, great question. Thank you.
There is another question you can read by Bidzinki. Say, what about static versus dynamic data visualization? Because in a story, you can add, you know, if you have a dynamic one, I think you can add context, and therefore for the audience to get the key message maybe different than from static visualization.
Yeah. If I understand it correctly, then it's a question about scenario. In what scenario is it helpful to do this kind of work? If you are, I don't know, doing data analysis, you know, just to get a result, to get a number in the end, why would you care what the audience thinks? You may not even have an audience. It's really just for yourself.
But we may think this question about, you know, data journalism when you have a paper or when you have a website. If I understand this question like this. It's more costly to put a lot of text and context on a paper than what you can do with several tools online.
It's more about an effort to target group to understand data. Yeah, I think this there is this like from the study that I showed where we analyzed the Reddit comments, there is still the big chunk of responses that goes about understanding. And I think what is super relevant, also what is one of the big limitations of that study, it's done on a public platform of people who do not collaborate, that do not have a shared goal. once you have a target group that has a shared goal, I expect the range of responses to shrink a lot, because who cares about, you walk by that street if it's about a planning tool, not a data collection. I think maybe I could have made this more clearly. I think really the scenario for this kind of contextualization is rather small or rather narrow. But I personally would be super interested if, especially in data journalism, where you have a similarly wide audience, how would a visualization that is participatory, that people have comment sections on news websites, and news websites move to more data visualizations. What does it take to integrate that? And how does it change how people read such a chart and these responses? And if we talk about comment sections, they are toxic. What kind of moderation do you need, to make it worthwhile for people and not make it as toxic as YouTube comment sections?
Yeah, no, maybe on social media, it's all the point is it's a place where you really can be toxic, and that's why people like that as well, and not only to put a nice comment, I like that, or to relate. But there is a question I would like to relate to that, because you did not mention that nowadays we know that there is this economy of attention movement, where we know that people are really, the attention is becoming some sort of a gold rush. We need to grab attention from people. And depending on the amount of attention you provide on a graphic, you may provide more or less context, or use pretentive variable or this kind of trick to grab the attention to some part. And then maybe once you have catch these people, you could really try to embed them and embed their story in that. So is that something you are considering in your research as well?
Now I do. No, I don't. I mean, attention grabbing, I think it's somewhat implicit in the work. Because one huge problem that we have is that we started this work as, what we could have done is invite 100 people to the lab, say, hey, use this prototype, or you use this prototype and you use this prototype, and then we compare what we see. But I think this has two major problems. On the one hand, we have the problem of anonymity. For the examples of querying the map, people would not express the same thing in a lab study. And on the other hand, it's about, if we want to measure how people engage, what is interesting to them, this is hard to measure in a lab study where you invite people to engage. So what I want to say is attention grabbing, obviously we need to do that. That's why we have this Twitter account, for example. That's why we try to get people on the website. That's why I really urge everybody to, after this talk, go there and leave a comment. But I think, what are you, attention for what? Is it attention for the data? That would be great, because this could emphasize the data. Or is it attention to the story behind the data? Because then the data is more or less irrelevant.
Yeah, I think that all this it's a very good point. I think it's whether you want to, what exactly is the goal of this attention? It could be the story, could be the engagement, could be the comments. And to me, I think it's also something that relates to the whole technique of visualization. When you say don't put the label on the side, put them on the graphic. It's here, don't put the comments on the side, put the comments and the life and the story inside the graphic. And by the way, there is not a question, but a comment by Joachim, one of our sponsors, so I should translate that, saying that in a tool he's using, they are producing, it's mostly time series graphic. He said that most of the time they put the comments on the side of the graphic. And now he's thinking, thanks to your presentation, of putting these comments inside the graphic. So they will have to redo everything, thanks to you. So, but I think it's
mistakes not to make when you do that, because we made a lot.
And he said also, we want to thank you because it's really inspiring for that, because they, maybe we have this some sort of habits, and we know that habits are not good. Of doing always the same. You put the comments on the side. Now I'm thinking of embedding them. It's a good thing. But I'm talking too much. Maybe my colleagues have some questions there, or some people in the audience. You want to raise your hand and open your mic. It's always this silence where, it's also because we don't have beers.
It has to get a bit awkward at some point. Let's meet up.
No, if nobody has a question, I have something also that came to my mind when you started with context and then what is a graphic. I remember that, a graphic, someone said, a graphic is an answer to a question. And here, you provide more questions and more answers because you say, oh, why is it increasing? It's increasing because more people. Oh, who are these people and why are they suffering for? Imagine for the COVID-19. So it's becoming to be much more than just a graphic. It's a whole question and answer you have here. And I think it's a brand new way of seeing graphics here.
Brand new might be a bit of an
improvement. Let's say it's an improvement.
I mean, what I think, or the broader body of research that you refer to, is this idea of data-driven storytelling. It's not just a graphic; it's a whole narrative, and we can use so many tools to improve the narrative of that graphic. But I think one of the problems of, maybe not problems, but one of the assumptions in data-driven storytelling is that the author of the visualization are the ones who tell the story. It's never open who tells the story, because obviously in data journalism you want things to be a bit coherent. So if you have 1,000 people screaming, there is definitely no story to be told. But I think there are scenarios where it's interesting to hear more than one voices. So what would this participatory storytelling and data visualization look like? And I think this is one small step towards learning this.
And would be the next step be collaborative research or collaborative gathering, not only of comments, but also on data and comments, so that, the story brings up as the people join to a community or something like that?
I think the next step, like you said, is the learning this language. Oh, go ahead, Alain.
Yeah, Alain. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a curiosity question. Could you tell us what are the technologies inside the Corona Moments?
Mm-hmm. It's basically a view application that handles the interaction. And the visualization part is written in D3, because it's the only web framework I'm really fluent in. And basically, all the moments are stored in a database, where also the COVID data is, and we have daily updates to get some of the to get daily real-time data for the Corona data. One thing that, if you ask about the technicalities, one thing that I have to mention is, if some of you are ever doing one of these studies where you want a public audience to use your visualization and you want to learn how they behave in it, make it responsive. Because
right.
Because we don't do that, and we lose about a third of the people, because we have this experimental setting where we want to compare different views and we want people to be able to fit comments and visualization on one screen. So we early on decided, okay, let's just make it not responsive. Don't do that.
Were you personally involved in the development of this site?
With the what? Excuse me?
Were you involved personally? Did you write code?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you did. Okay, right.
I did, and I'm not a coder by training. So if anybody here reviews the source, don't tell me.
You have big fans of these three here, so be careful.
Okay.
So are there any other comments on your talk, on the website? I hope that everybody will join this website. I put the link on the chat already, and we will, of course, also advertise for that. Oh. There is no data journalist here, I think, in the list of participants. I didn't see in the presentation. That would be very interesting to have the point of view of a data journalist. Maybe you already contacted some. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not. Some Berlin data news outlets are interested, and the story ran in a Berlin newspaper and Potsdam newspaper, which also helped with increasing participant numbers, but they didn't say, oh, let's embed this on our website and see what people say, because I think we also were super afraid that we would have dozens of Corona skeptics saying, oh, these numbers are fake. And I spent, I don't know, a week to develop a reporting function, and no, we didn't get any of that. But if you were a news outlet, I think you would be liable for the content that you have on there.
I think for the moment, as you say, the journalists, their job is to tell a story, and this is, I'm telling you. I do not want you to tell me. I eventually allow you to comment me, and with all the problems you mentioned, but allowing people to tell their own story, and that becomes a graphic, seems something also very interesting. We also discussed that, but and maybe I have a question here on the Corona moment. You have just this line plot with some stiff bubbles. Did you envision another type of graphic, or that was the one that came naturally there? Or do you have some other type of graphic in mind for other type of data or stories?
We had some coded prototypes, because what we initially wanted to do was a bit more aggregation. Basically what we are running now is a bee swarm plot that follows the line, and then it just disperses when there is a lot of data. We had the idea of aggregating more and have basically additional lines that layer on top of the line, because it was visually super interesting, but in the end it didn't match the data. What we also imagined was, why take this step and represent a story with a bubble? Why not just make for example, endlessly zoomable interface of text that, maybe goes along the chart or over the chart, and that maybe would also, I still like the interface. It didn't work in the end because I think better coders would have realized it more readable. Everything that I did was not legible, but I still find it super interesting, that when you have these many voices at one point in time, that you have text that overlayers each other, and you start to be unable to identify the singular voice, and that you know, there is a beauty in not being able to read things because it stands for something.
Yeah, because I was curious, these bits form, they are either on top or the bottom of the line, but we know that the line is a count of all the experience at one point in time. So somehow it does give the impression that the line goes through the life of the people.
That's a nice way to read that.
It's not a statistical way of reading it, because a statistician would have put, you know, just 3 dots and the line and say, we have the story for these 3 people and we don't know for the rest, but the line is there. But here, I think it goes well with the fact that what is important is not really the line. It's where it goes through the story somehow.
Yeah. But like everything I take away from the questions and the discussion is, there is so much to learn about that language of, you know, how can we represent not just the data, but the responses to the data, because, you know, is the bubble above or below the chart? Does it say something or doesn't? We do not make use of so many visual variables yet, because we couldn't fill them anyway. So there's a lot of things to develop, one PhD at a time. Thank you, everybody. This was nice.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.